I don't know if I have the heart to watch this, but I guess, we'll take a look at it.
Downtown Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. This was once, about 100 years ago, one of the richest cities in the world, and you could tell as you walk around the faded grandeur of a once great soccer star. Why do you think, from your perspective, you've become a man with no political background, so popular?
Bro, he literally looks like the corporate guys in Death Note, dude. I swear to God, he looks like one of the corporate guys in Death Note at the end of it. You know what I'm talking about? I can't unsee it, dude. It blows my goddamn mind. I just you see that goofy ass haircut and you go, I'm going to vote for this guy. Like, how do you get yourself to do that? How? Oh, this is awesome. Argentine presidential candidate Javier Milei clarifies on Instagram post that he did not fuck his own sister. Like, that's the guy that we're at. Here are some of the falsehoods that he had to clarify are simply falsehoods. He also said that his sister, Karina Milei, would become the first lady of Argentina. Milei literally said, and I quote, "The state is a horny pedophile in front of a kindergarten full of tied-up, lubricated children." I'm not even kidding. Dude, I can't tell. I literally cannot tell if people that talk about what Milei has said are memeing and saying unhinged shit, or if he actually said those unhinged things. Because honestly, first, he looks like this. So he looks like the type of person who would say that. And two, not only is he a sister, allegedly, but also he has said a bunch of unhinged shit, and he's an ANCAP. He's a libertarian. So libertarians love trafficking in pedophilia hypotheticals. This is the face of a man who gets it between the eyes and bleeds out on the gutter in the streets of Marseille at the end of a Jean-Paul Belmondo, Lino Ventura 70s gritty French cop picture called Le Pistolet est à moi, la balle est à vous. This is the most insane thing that 11,000 people like. Argentina just elected a new president who says he met his first dog while he was a gladiator in Rome 2,000 years ago, and that he now communicates with his 5 clone dogs through a mystic. Oh, and he also wants to legalize the organ trade, amongst lots of perfectly sane ideas. He has been asked if he would make a market for babies, because he draws a lot of inspiration from Rothbard, who did say that there should be an efficient market, like a free market for babies, literally children. And he said, maybe, right? Or did he say, I'll consider it? When asked the question, would you like to create a marketplace for babies? I believe he said something along the lines of I'll consider it, or it depends. Oh yeah, he said it depends. Sorry, I didn't want to misquote him. He said it depends. He says he can speak to the dead. He oftentimes talks about how he hallucinates. Here, far-right extremist Javier Milei won Argentina's presidential election. He wants to legalize the sale of children and human organs, abolish public health care, education, and transportation, abandon monetary sovereignty, and adopt the U.S. dollar. He says his dead dog Kona speaks to him from the afterlife and advises him on economic policy. Argentina was invited to join BRICS, but far-right President-elect Javier Milei has pledged to withdraw. The extremist boasted, our geopolitical alignment is with the U.S. and Israel. We are not going to align with communists. That's the other part. He hates the deep, of course, ANCAPs, very deep hatred for any kind of demonstration of communism, which includes, but is not limited to, public health care. Argentina's extreme right president-elect Javier Milei pledged to cut ties with China and Brazil, Argentina's 2 biggest trading partners with 35% of trade. Instead, Milei wants Argentina to be totally subordinated to the USA, which he basically worships. In his platform, Argentina's extremist libertarian fascist president-elect Javier Milei calls for a Pinochet-style regime, militarization of the institutions during the transition, building for profit public-private prisons, making it easier to imprison people, mandating forced labor for prisoners, reducing the age being considered. Oh my God. Well, there it is. Well, of course, dude, you can't have an ANCAP that doesn't constantly advocate for the abolition of the age of consent. Despite his absurd libertarian rhetoric, Argentina's extreme right president-elect Javier Milei has constantly whitewashed the fascist U.S.-backed military dictatorship that ruled his country, denying its mass murder, torture, and disappearing of leftists. In addition to promising a totally subordinate Argentina to the U.S. and adopt the U.S. dollar as national currency, extreme right president-elect Javier Milei loves Israel. Milei recently waved an Israeli flag at a rally. He sees Israel's far-right apartheid regime as a model. A model for what? I don't know. Responding to a far-right president-elect Javier Milei's plan to adopt the U.S. dollar as Argentina's currency to fight inflation, renowned development economist Ha Jun-chan said this is insane, warning dollarization would make Argentina a U.S. colony. I don't want to defend the piece of shit, but he means to lower the age at which you can go to prison. Not that it's much better, to be honest. Oh, sorry. He doesn't mean lower the age of consent. He means like lower the age of what is declared a minor, obviously, which would also lower the age of consent. But maybe the way he's presenting it is so that you can put children in prison so you can have child labor in prison child labor. Here's a video clip in which Argentina's extreme right president-elect Javier Milei proposed creating a free market of adoptions. That is his euphemistic way of calling to make it legal to sell human children on the free market, which is Rothbard. Like, he is following the ANCAP principles. Many Argentine news outlets reported on far-right President-elect Javier Milei proposing a free market of babies. He wants to illegalize abortion and says selling kids is a solution. Milei is a follower of extreme right anarcho-capitalist Murray Rothbard, who proposed this. There you go. This is true. This was a real proposal. And he is following through on it, which is insane, but also kind of funny. But I don't know what else to say about it other than the fact that, holy shit, the people voted for this guy. An ideological hero of Argentina's far-right president-elect Javier Milei is U.S. anarcho-capitalist Murray Rothbard. While proposing a flourishing free market in children, Rothbard also opposed civil rights, promoted racist race science, and supported KKK leader David Duke. Rothbard wanted a libertarian police state, writing, "Cops must be unleashed and allowed to administer instant punishment on poor people, but not on rich white-collar criminals and inside traders." Slash taxes. All taxes, sales, business, property, etc., but especially the most oppressive and politically and personally, the income tax. We must work towards the repeal of the income tax and the abolition of the IRS. Slash welfare. Get rid of the underclass rule by abolishing the welfare system, or short of abolition, severely cutting and restricting it. Number 3, abolish racial group or group privileges. Abolish affirmative action, set aside racial quotas, etc., and point out that the root of such quotas is the entire civil rights structure, which tramples on the property rights of every American. Number 4. Meanwhile,
well, folks, good news from
Argentina's new president is just spectacular. Of course, Ben Shapiro made an article slobbering on this dude's knob, dude. Oh my God, of course. Because he's physically incapable of holding a position that is good. If there is bad in the world, Ben Shapiro will ride for it. If there's bad in the world, he will die for it.
Argentina. Cool things happening there. Last night, Argentina shocked the world by electing a libertarian outsider named Javier Milei. Now, Milei is by far the most entertaining person in the world. I mean, like on the planet. Javier Milei, this guy is wildly entertaining. Not only because he happens to be extremely conservative. And we say he's libertarian, not an abortion he ain't. He is a full-scale proponent of the pro-life position, for example. He also does not happen to be particularly libertarian on certain forms of drug use, for example. So the description of him as a libertarian is not quite right. He's actually just a classical liberal with very conservative undertones in terms of religion and the importance of culture.
He's just a fascist, which is why Ben is glazing him up like he's a Benihana onion tower getting sprayed with oil, ready to create a volcano. Another debt restructuring. That could still be some way off. The IMF has effectively barred Argentina from accessing international markets while the country pays back its debts. Argentina owns Washington, D.C.-based lender some $44 billion following a historic bailout in 2018. Kristalina Georgieva, the fund's managing director, congratulated Milei on his election victory Monday. There you go. We look forward to working closely with him and his administration in the period ahead to develop and implement a strong plan to safeguard macroeconomic stability and strengthen inclusive growth for Argentinians, she wrote on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Milei will need all the help he can get. The World Bank expects the Argentine economy to contract by 2.5% in 2023, owing in part to a devastating drought that is estimated to have cost $20 billion in lost agricultural exports. What's more, Jackson of Capital Economics expects the IMF to shift away from its recent leniency towards Argentina. It's not clear if a debt restructuring will be demanded at this point, but we are moving in that direction, he said. What that means for Argentina, for those of you who are trying to understand it in good terms, or in easy terms to understand, is they're going to say, no more free college, no more free healthcare. We're coming in and we're cutting everything.
Instead, their economic models are shaped by the IMF, who impose
When the IMF was formed in 1944, one of the goals of its founding charter was to promote human welfare. The charter looks like Disneyland. What's proposed there is beautiful. But in practical terms, it's doing exactly the opposite. Instead of promoting policies to create more jobs, it promotes budget cuts. Very basic stuff. Here's how the IMF works. You go to a country that is impoverished. You go to a country that desperately needs to industrialize. Maybe they are a post-colonial nation that, for the first time ever, has like some semblance of political capital to expend. And they have natural resources. They have a robust labor force that you can utilize that is going to be much cheaper than the domestic labor force of Western countries. So what do? We go in and we give them money, okay? We give them insane conditions on these loans. We give them money and we go, hey, here's how you can use the money. And here's what you need to do to pay back the money. Now, of course, you go into this very poor country and you give them money so that they can industrialize. But who can they industrialize with? Well, they have to industrialize by utilizing Western nations because, one, they are usually the only countries that do actually have the techniques and the technology and the know-how of rapid industrialization. So you, in some instances, literally have to work with them, Western companies, that is. And also, in other circumstances, like they might literally tell you, no, you have to work with them, depending on what the conditions look like. So then you get this loan and you can't even recirculate the loan in your own country in the way that you would want to. You can't even use the loan in the way that you want to. You have to give the loan, or you have to take the loan and spend it back on the Western economy, Western corporations. So then you build up these factories, right? You build up the roads, you build up the factories, all in an effort so that your country, which has a ton of natural resources, can be perfectly set for exploitation. Now you have a labor force that can work in the factory, if that is at all, if you're lucky enough to be able to depending on the material conditions in your country, like, and if it's a necessity, then they'll build the factory. If not, they won't even do that. But you can only work with Western corporations. So everyone that benefits from the IMF loans is in the West. You get a little bit of modernization with a shit ton of conditions. Now, so you start having to slowly but surely pay back those loans. How are you going to do that? The money is not circulating inside of the country. The money is not circulating inside of your labor force. Your labor force is already still working at the same domestic wage prices. But now, and your material wealth or the natural resources that you had are directly benefiting through unequal exchange the Western world. So now you have all of this, let's say you have minerals, right? Rare minerals, or let's say you have petroleum. You have oil refineries, and you're extracting oil, and you're in a lot of instances, the countries that built those refineries will then turn around and say, well, we have a 20-year contract, 30-year contract where you have to give us all this oil because we built the factory and you didn't know how to take the oil out of the ground. So now you have to give us the oil personally. Or you can't really do anything with the, even if we let you have some of the oil that you're taking out of the ground, we are still going to tell you what you can do with that money. So they let you have a little bit of a crumb. The governments are oftentimes also very corrupt too, on top of everything else. And then, even if you have a little bit of a crumb of the wealth that you are now extracting, where does that wealth go back to? Well, that goes back to paying the loans, which you are not extracting enough to be able to genuinely pay the loans. So it's a double bind. None of the wealth on the ground actually ended up helping you. You got some shiny objects in the meantime, in the interim. But the reality was it was just a way to formalize a newer colonial standard. All you've done at the end of the day is basically give your natural resources to the Western world so they can use it, while simultaneously trying to pay back these loans that you literally cannot there's no way to pay back those loans at all. So then the IMF will come in and say, okay, we'll do debt restructuring, Or we'll give you even more loans to try to pay back those loans. Or we'll do debt restructuring. And the conditions kick in at that point where they say, well, here's what you have to do. All of the other sectors that you have that are currently publicly owned, you have to privatize and sell off to, and you might have guessed it, Western capitalists. So then you take away certain parts of your key sectors, like your agricultural industry or your mining industry, whatever remains that was like directly benefiting the government coffers, and you sell it off to private industry. All the while, the Western forces force you to implement austerity measures, which of course means no more welfare, no more social safety nets, no more government spending on domestic policy. And if you don't do that, and you try to play this delicate balance of like continuously having social safety nets while regularly getting more and more foreign debt and racking it up, well, then you turn into Argentina. Please show us an example of this. Argentina.
Demonstrators gathered primarily to show support for Argentina's current progressive government, but everyone was talking about the IMF loan signed by former president Mauricio Macri.
Yo creo que Mauricio Macri hizo el trabajo que vino a hacer, que es un empleado de las multinacionales. Mauricio Macri es simplemente
simply an emissary, a messenger.
Él se llevó lo mínimo. Nosotros,
when he acquired the IMF loan,
es la nueva forma de colonización.
that's the new form of colonization. In the past, they would invade. Now they give you debt, and that's how they rule over you. It's no longer necessary to shoot bullets. It's that simple. Macri is the one who was inside the Trojan horse to open the doors of Argentina to be invaded by stealth. They want us in the working class to be subdued. They want slaves, not workers.
In recent years, the working class in Argentina has been struggling due to economic stability and a decrease in living standards. The devaluation of the Argentinian peso has made it challenging for workers to make ends meet. In 2022, 62% of Argentine children and adolescents were in poverty.
And by the way, this kind of like debtor enslavement is really effective because guess what? One thing that America benefits from is not having a lot of economic instability. Obviously, there's crises almost every 5 years now. But beyond that, a lot of the prices of necessities that you need for survival, with the exception of obviously the number one indicator for upward social mobility, education, and also, shelter. Basically, outside of those two things, and healthcare as well, outside of those three things, a lot of the prices of consumer goods remain relatively stable in comparison to all of these other countries, right? So when you have a level of price stability on those things that you need for survival immediately, and there's enough like diversity in where you can at least seek some level of shelter, you are not going to have that same level of economic volatility that causes revolutionary action or even fascist dictatorships coming in and taking control. Whereas in countries like this, the economic volatility is enforced by Western capitalists, and therefore it's a perfect opportunity to, bring a guy like Milei in and fuck up the country even further. Old school colonialism was not very efficient. You don't need to have colonies when you can just beat them down economics style. Yes, I agree.
While 13% were classed as being in destitution. Put in context, 8.2 million children are living in households that can't afford the basic food basket, which is a measure of the minimum level of food required for a healthy life.
El gobierno de Mauricio Macri lo que hizo fue volver al FMI. Argentina, en el gobierno de Néstor Kirchner, había logrado desendeudar a la Argentina.
On December 10th, 2015, right-winger Mauricio Macri took office as president of Argentina. He spent his electoral campaign talking about how he would roll back the progressive measures implemented by the Kirchners, who took turns in governing Argentina over 12 years. On that premise, Macri won the elections and started implementing a series of neoliberal measures, cuts to state spending, and restructuring the economy to benefit corporations. In June 2018, during the final year and a half of Macri's presidency, the Argentinian government signed the largest loan agreement in the IMF's history.
Mauricio Macri, con la idea de insertar a Argentina en el mundo nuevamente, lo que hizo fue insertarla
Instead,
en las
Argentina's economic
políticas
policies were being
económicas que
dictated by the
dictaminaba el
IMF.
FMI. El FMI te presta plata si vos
The IMF lends you money if you accept
aceptás
certain
determinado
types of
tipo de
demands,
contraprestación que tenía que ver con achicamiento
such
del
as shrinking the
Estado,
state,
con
reducing
ajuste en el
spending,
bolsillo y en el
and
déficit
accepting fiscal
fiscal.
deficit
Y en ese
adjustments.
momento Argentina, de estar
And at that
totalmente
time, Argentina went from being totally out of debt to taking out on a debt of $57 billion.
Ese fue el último. Hubo
And that
otros
was just one of the more
previamente,
recent
en el
ones.
momento que
Previously, there were other
Macri
loans from the
ingresa
time when
nuevamente
Macri
al FMI.
rejoined the
Y
IMF.
obviamente volvió a tener una
And obviously, the IMF had an office in the
oficina
Argentinian
del
Central
Banco
Bank.
Central en el FMI. Es decir, monitoreaba desde la casa.
That is, the IMF was stationed in a place that governs Argentina's monetary policy. I think it's good to watch like maybe something like a short summarization of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. There's a 9-hour audio book of this book as well from John Perkins. There's also another documentary, like a short documentary. Maybe we can watch that. That will help you develop a better understanding of how we saddle poor countries with debt and then we exploit them.
Central que rige la política monetaria de la Argentina empezó a registrar
Started
y a
monitoring
monitorear
that the
y a
Argentine
fiscalizar
economy was
cómo se
developing.
desarrollaba la economía argentina. Nada se hacía sin la autorización del
Nothing was done without the
con
IMF
lo cual sí fue
authorization, which was
determinante.
determining factor in today's crisis.
The $57 billion given by the IMF to Macri's government represents 127 times Argentina's debt capacity, according to the government's own audit office. The same 2023 audit report found the terms of the credit agreement to be inefficient and ineffective.
Dejó un país destruido que Alberto tuvo que tratar de levantarlo. Le tocó la pandemia, le toca la guerra, le tocó la sequía. Fue difícil. Y bueno, y tomar una deuda a nada de salir del gobierno, que era para sacarla afuera y para financiar su campaña, y a la clase, ni siquiera a la clase baja, a la clase media la destruyó también. O esto afecta a todos.
Primero, vos me preguntás cómo se usó. El 30%.
What would happen if a government refused to pay off loans like a revolutionary government? Well, there's a couple different things that can happen, but if you don't pay off the loans, you'll be shut off from the entire global marketplace. And in a country where your agricultural exports are very important, you're cooked. Yeah, they'll come and they'll repo your possessions that they say they've built, or they'll asset strip you. So there are different ways in which this has happened in the past. You can also have a democratic election where the government decides to move in that direction, or you can even have a violent revolution. And you'll either go the way of Cuba if you're lucky, or the way of Venezuela if you're not lucky, especially if you do not have any opportunity to diversify your industries, like diversify your economy. And it's hyper reliant on one type of key export in extraction. It's shit all around. Yeah, here, Lebanon defaulted on its 1.2 billion. Anyway, let's continue.
De ese crédito total.
What if a country defaults on its loans and then fakes its death? Would that get the heat off of it? Yeah, that's what you got to do.
Se usó para fuga de divisas. 13.000 millones de pesos, no de dólares, pero de pesos, se usaron para pagar al FMI en cantidad de conceptos de intereses, en temas administrativos, asesoramiento. Y de esa plata, una parte importante ya se lo cobraban en comisiones, ¿sí? Ya de entrada. Y después, una parte importante, a fines de 2018, se revisa ese acuerdo con el FMI y autoriza para gastos internos el FMI, con lo cual tenía discrecionalidad del gobierno que usaba la plata. En concreto,
in fact, they did not build a fucking bridge in Argentina. They didn't build a school.
No se hizo ningún tipo de
They didn't build any basic
infraestructura para que Argentina tenga,
like, for example, improving Argentina's energy grid.
Con lo cual, esa guita principalmente se fugó.
So basically, that money
Se usó
disappeared.
para la campaña
It was used for Macri's
Macri,
campaign so we
para
could become
volver a ser
president
presidente,
again.
que no lo logró. Pero digamos, se comió y se fumó.
The money
de
was
una manera
squandered, it
totalmente
completely
espuria.
disappeared.
Más allá de eso, ese crédito fue totalmente ilegal.
Beyond that, the loan was totally
Sumado a
illegal.
eso, imagínate
Imagine at the end of the 2019, shortly before the
fines del
election,
2019, poco antes de las elecciones, constituía ese préstamo
The loan
el
constituted 89% of
89% del PBI de
Argentina's
Argentina.
GDP.
Con lo cual es
Making it
insostenible
completely
el
unsustainable.
condicionamiento en el cual queda el gobierno
problems are
entrante,
then
sea el partido
left
que fuere,
to the
porque
incoming
era muy
government
difícil sostener
because
una
it would be
política
very difficult to
pública
sustain a public
con un
policy that represents
89%
89% of the public
de
debt.
deuda, ¿no? Así que nada, no se usó para nada de lo que tiene que usarse un crédito del FMI, ¿no? Más allá de que
Beyond the fact that it breached the IMF's own
rompía
charter.
la carta orgánica del FMI, rompía la Constitución de Argentina y por otro lado era un
It's one of the most controversial loans in world history.
Despite the efforts of the progressive government to improve the situation of workers, the economic conditions of the working class have not improved due to the austerity measures imposed by the IMF and the global downturn. Although many workers face real difficulties in terms of spiraling living costs, they persist in coming together and demanding improved working conditions.
Se sufre una baja del poder adquisitivo, cada vez se puede adquirir menos cosas.
Dude, this Argentina stuff is so boring. Oh man, enough of this, dude. No, I don't want to care. This is why your account created and your following date is the same day, because you come in here and you fucking chirp, and then I ban you, so you have to make a new sock account and chirp again, and then you get fucking banned again.
Cosas básicas como la canasta básica, ¿no? El azúcar, el aceite, y con eso uno vive, y eso nos afecta también a nosotros, por ejemplo, a los jóvenes, principalmente por el hecho de que leo mucho también la pérdida, la baja posibilidad de adquirir una vivienda, una propiedad.
Entonces eso afecta a los trabajadores. En el día a día, en el comprar las cosas, en no llegar a fin de mes, en tener que tener varios trabajos.
Don't worry, I'm gonna get to the dessert in a second, because there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about with respect to Milei. I just want to give, like, you need to have some understanding of the foundations of how Argentina got to the point that it got to, so that you can enjoy the dessert of Milei and how much of a fucking meme he is, and what this election means for the future of Argentina. And also on top of that, just because I followed on the same day as account creation doesn't mean I'm a sock account. That being said, I am a sock account. Here, take a second off and reconsider.
Bajos, en esa situación hoy está la clase trabajadora.
Y no, nos dejó un gran peso que todavía hasta el día de hoy lo seguimos padeciendo. Y lo vamos a seguir padeciendo por más de 100 años.
In this struggle, organized labor has been demanding improved wages, benefits, and working conditions to alleviate growing insecurity. The unions are also at the forefront of resisting austerity measures and anti-worker policies. The fight for economic justice in Argentina is ongoing, but the perseverance and dedication of the working class provides optimism for a brighter tomorrow.
La militancia es estar en la calle, es exigir, es estar atenta a qué necesitan los compañeros, a pedir y a exigir a los dirigentes, que son, en este caso, nosotros militamos para que Alberto y Cristina estén en el gobierno, entonces exigirle bueno, sobre todo a Alberto, que ahora nosotros estamos exigiendo una suma fija para equiparar salarios, estamos en esa disputa hoy. Claro, es eso, ¿no? Que los salarios de los trabajadores estén por encima de la canasta básica. Hoy eso no está equiparado.
Yo creo que tiene conciencia la clase trabajadora. Está organizada. El tema es que, claro, con la economía te desorganizan la vida, vos no tenés tiempo, vos tenés que estar todo el día pensando en tus necesidades básicas y ellos se encargan de...
This video is so biased. The country is such a state of poverty because of the corruption that took place during the 16 years of the Kirchner government, 12 directly plus 4 Alberto. They're literally paid to talk good on the government, brainwash people. What the fuck are you talking about? To say that this is specifically 16 years of the Kirchner government, which there is truth to what you're saying, even though you are, I don't know if you're like a libertarian troll, but to say that this is specifically a product of the 16 years of the Kirchner government, 12 directly plus 4 Alberto, is missing the forest for the trees. Then you followed it up with, they literally paid to talk good on the government, brainwash people. Ultimately, I personally think individual corruption from leadership cannot even remotely account for the devastating impact that the IMF has on an entire nation's economy. Like, no matter how corrupt you are, and God knows there are definitely a lot of corrupt leaders in most of these countries, including Recep Tayyip Erdogan's regime in Turkey as well. But ultimately, they are the ones who are the most servile with respect to the interests of global capitalist forces, and therefore that kind of corruption is gone unnoticed.
Vos no te enteres de lo que pasa. Ellos te mantienen ocupado con señuelos, digamos así, y por atrás se la llevan todo. Esto es de manual, pasó toda la vida, no es de ahora simplemente. Mirá, la solidaridad...
Nestor Kirchner actually forced the FMI to restructure the debt Argentina had for Kirchner's government to finally pay it. Sadly, the comeback of FMI with Macri's government meant going back to being unstable. Alberto Fernandez's government was also super bad. It didn't help Peronismo to establish a good future with them. Milei might be bad, but honestly, for people in Argentina like me and many other people, he seems like the least worst option. But here's what I don't understand. Why do you recognize the issues here, but then don't recognize that Milei is going to literally do worse shit? The thing I don't understand is literally looking at a problem and being like, well, you know what will solve this issue that we have? You know what will solve this issue? Honestly, doing more of the bad shit. Because it's not the least worst option. Selling off every single government asset you have to vulturous capitalists in the Western world that will simply care about their own profit margins is not good. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, dude, think about it this way. You have fucking healthcare. Can you imagine if any kind of like public healthcare is just immediately sold off to like American companies? Think about it this way. You look to the United States of America and you probably laugh, even from Argentina, where you go, how funny, these fucking dumbasses have all the wealth on the planet and yet they can't even take care of their own citizens. It's ridiculous to be one of the wealthiest nations on the planet and have a major crisis in socialized medicine in a country like the United States of America. Now, how do we fix that problem? Oh, by bringing in a dude who's going to, before I get to this IMF chief take that I already mentioned from the CNN article that we were reading, there is no way in which on this fucking planet, selling off what remains of your social safety nets or your resources to Western corporations is going to make things better for you. I get what you mean. I didn't want Milei to win, but it's the only one that actually proposed ideas, and I think that's what made. And being honest, where everyone here doesn't think that he will remove any public health care. Okay, but it's not just public health care. It's the one aspect that I mentioned, and he will absolutely do that, by the way. He will do anything and everything that the IMF wants him to do. The reason why I mentioned public health care is because many people are silly and get too comfortable thinking popular public amenities will never go away. That's not the case, especially if you voted in a guy who said, I'm going to kill every fucking every government. Like, I'm going to blow up the government. I'm going to blow up the central bank. He doesn't mean what he says is insane. No, it's not insane. It's unfortunately something that I hear all the time from Republicans in the United States of America, and even fucking Democrats too, to a certain degree. People do not believe that reactionary politicians will be so bad. Sometimes it's much, much slower, like the NHS in the UK, crippled over austerity measures being implemented slowly but surely by Tory governments, back-to-back Tory governments over the course of 15 fucking years or even longer, ultimately until it comes to a breaking point where people go, what the fuck? I can't get my goddamn healthcare. What good is this to me? And then they think, well, I guess we should privatize certain aspects of this. And that's precisely what's happening. It happened with public transportation in the UK, and it will happen with the NHS as well, even though it's broadly popular and people would never, in one singular force, in one singular blow, destroy the NHS. It doesn't happen overnight. Meanwhile, the guy that they voted for in Argentina is the type of dude who says, no, I'm going to do it overnight. This is one of the major issues of capitalism and social democracy. Yeah, here, I've heard, it's so funny. It's capitalists, hyper-capitalists do the same shit. It's not an option. Please, Chatter, he will remove it, he said. Libertarians say he won't because he said he'll establish a voucher system, but his ultimate goal is to remove it as he is an anarcho-capitalist. Exactly. He will remove it. And if you voted for a fucking anarcho-capitalist who like is a clown ass too on top of that, and you think he won't remove it. You just voted for a guy who will. Your principles and your fears and I guess like your confidence in this government is unfounded. I do think he means what he says. I've been arguing about that with a lot of people many times. What I mean is that Peronismo, neither USR will let him do the things that he proposes about the IMF doing whatever they want to the country. It's already been happening. I'm not saying that Milei is a good choice. I'm saying that Milei is as horrible as Massa. The idea that like there's an opposition government that will stop him is also unfounded. When there's a will, there's a way. And if the exact same fucking government and leaders in the previous governments literally also had no choice but to make deals with the IMF, why the fuck would they actually get in the way of this guy continuing on with even worse austerity measures? Why are you ignoring the fact that he has no majority in Congress? I'm going to get to it. Hold on. I'm going to get to that part. Do not worry. That is actually a very important part. I briefly brought it up in the beginning of this conversation, but I haven't gotten back to that yet, but I will talk about that in a brief moment. I just wanted to give some more fundamentals in the background as to like how Argentina got to the place that American chatters are completely oblivious to. And then we're going to talk about what it means that he has a no majority in Congress and an opposition, but it doesn't matter. Here's why it doesn't matter, and I'll tell you by using American examples in a second.
Yo creo que a veces los une la miseria y el espanto a los trabajadores. Por más que estemos una punta a la otra ideológicamente, cuando llega el enemigo es uno. Si vos no sabés cuál es tu enemigo, quién es el lobo que te viene a devorar, estás en problemas. O sea, el obrero, si no tiene conciencia de que hay gente, poca gente, a nivel mundial también, que concentra las riquezas y que el resto somos todos simplemente una pieza, una maquinaria que se cambia y se tira. Si no entendemos eso, más allá de las ideologías, estamos en problemas todos. Si no sabemos reconocer quiénes son nuestros enemigos, estamos en problemas. Y eso es lo que se encargan todos los días de estupidizarnos, ¿viste? De hacernos enfrentar entre nosotros, pero en realidad nos van a devorar uno a uno igual. Así que o nos juntamos o nos juntamos y nos defendemos o empezamos a perder. Así es.
All right. Anyway, we already covered the debt restructuring that might happen with the IMF. Here's my assumption. And I am admittedly not the most well-read on Argentina. I just know some of the basics. But my assumption is that an opposition Congress is not simply there to oppose Milei, but instead, Milei plays a softening role that the supposed opposition government will implement. This is speculation, but my speculation is that the opposition government will still implement similar austerity measures, and they will look to be a force for reason in comparison to the guy that everyone is paying attention to, because he is a meme, and he is insane, and he is like super far right. So what I personally believe, just say you don't know, man. Wait, what? This is such a fucking idiotic I'm a political commentator, man. What the fuck's wrong with your goddamn brain? Like, what do you mean? Why do you come in here if you don't want to fucking hear my perspective? Explain yourself. What do you mean by this? Before we get to the meme stuff, I guess my point was the speculation, speculation here is that I think that they'll do whatever is necessary, and the policies will be awful for Argentina in general. And then everyone will hyper-focus on his most reactionary policies, his most reactionary statements. And everyone will go, well, look, it's not as bad as Milei, and the government is more sane and more reasonable. And the outcome will be the same regardless. He might not be able to serve out his terms because he has to report to the IDF reserves. What? Yeah. He's on it. He's gonna save Israel personally from Hamas, which is one of the memes, I guess. Here, what were we gonna talk about? What did I want to talk about? Oh, here's some of the fun stuff, I guess, or not so fun, really fucking freakish. Hanania Naftali, Argentinian presidential candidate Javier Milei, waves the flag of Israel for all to see that he stands with Israel, to which Bad Empanado responded with, Milei is a supporter of Argentina's 1976 to 83 military dictatorship, which legitimately believed that Israel had a secret plan called Plan Andes to militarily seize Patagonia and form a second Jewish state there. They kidnapped or murdered about 3,000 Jews. This, by the way, is literally it's worse than October 7. It is the most deadly anti-Jewish pogrom that happened outside of the Holocaust. They kidnapped or murdered about 3,000 Jews. The survivors testified that they were tortured for information about this plan. This guy responds, I've been listening to Javier Milei since 2015, which is fucking odd to say. Why would you admit that? He never said that. He hates the military dictatorship because he's in favor of freedom. So if you want to defame him, he finds another way. Not only does he support, to which Baden Panana responded with, not only does he support the dictatorship openly by denying things like how many people were killed and calling their crimes only excesses, but his vice president, Victoria Villarreal, I'm going to be so bad at saying these names, not even close. I know, shut the fuck up. Is a leader among those pro-dictatorship movement. She advocates for human rights violators to be freed and was a noted friend of dictator Jorge Rafael Videla and police chief Miguel Echecolatz. Roll your goddamn R's, dog. Visha Ruel. Oh, Via Ruel. Is that how you say it? I don't fucking know. I know how to roll my goddamn R's, bitch. We roll our R's in Turkish too. I just don't know how to read it. Rrr. All right. Both of whom were condemned to life in prison for mass murders. Milei denies 30,000 missing people under the Argentine dictatorship. Here it is. Villarreal's name was found in the notebook that Echecolatz used to prepare his defense in the trial in which he was found guilty of dozens of murders. He and his allies later disappeared and murdered a witness at one of his other trials. Let's do this last thing. What is an economic hitman? Decoded. And then we will talk about...
Who are the economic hitmen? Are they putting insolvent countries in huge debt in order to control them and profit from their resources?
The rich were getting rich, but the poor were getting poorer.
I think what's important is that it absolutely happened and it benefited a small group of rich people in the global north.
That it's important for people to understand. This is a systemic problem.
This is like a movified magic, Hollywood magic version of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I think.
Crashed into one of the towers.
The fuck? President Kennedy crashed into one of the Twin Towers? They shot this like a movie. The guy, I think, is an actor.
Money was being diverted from health care, education, to pay off the loans.
There were a lot of people that did benefit from these crises.
Everything has been done to keep this game going.
Are there economic hitmen from powerful organizations that get poor countries to sign up for infrastructures that they don't necessarily need and take up loans that they essentially cannot repay in order to make profit? After I studied economics, I worked as a stock trader. I traded stocks and bonds for a few years. I would read company research and study the price movement in the market. It sounds boring, but I loved it. I actually still do. In my family, everyone is good with numbers, but I left the trading floor to become an actor. And because of my previous job in the market, I came across a book titled Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, and I was shocked. These people were not discussing buying and selling stocks or companies. It is actually about buying and selling entire economies. The writer talked about economic hitmen who coordinate with bigger nations to exploit and devour poorer countries. Professional people whose job is to deceive countries and extort them with trillions of dollars. Is this a colonial tactic to strip countries of their resources and political will? A country that needs to build or renew its infrastructure will need capital. It also needs the expertise, technology, equipment, and all of that. Developing countries likely will import some or all of this from another country. In order to pay for the imports, they will take a loan. It seems simple and straightforward, right? Fortunately, I can talk to someone who did this job. His name is John Perkins. I want to ask him about his previous job.
I was recruited by a big international consulting firm called Charles T. Main, which has since been bought, so the name no longer is out there. My title was chief economist. And I had as many as 50 people working for me. My job really was to identify countries that had resources our corporations wanted, like oil, like in the Middle East, oil. And then to arrange for a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or the IMF or one of the sister organizations. But the money would not actually go to the country itself. The country would collateralize the loan with its resource. But the money would go directly to our own corporations, big engineering companies like Bechtel and Halliburton and Brown and Root, and my own company would get a piece.
Because it's like, well, his own company is like the mediator in the situation, but because the countries that have the natural resources, as Parenti would say, these are not poor nations, but instead very rich nations. You wouldn't rob a poor person, you would rob a rich person. The difference is, or the problem is, of course, that these are very rich nations that are overexploited. Why are they overexploited? Because they have the wealth. They have the wealth in natural resources. They're resource rich, but they do not have the actual development. They haven't industrialized.
Piece of the action to build infrastructure projects in the country. Things like power plants and industrial parks and highways, things that benefited a few rich people in those countries, as well as making huge profits for our own corporations. For a long time, I thought I was doing the right thing, as many people in that business do. But over time, I began to see that those statistics, GDP, gross domestic product, and other statistics are very skewed to the rich. And so the rich were getting rich, but the poor were getting poorer because money was being diverted from health care, education, and other social services, and just basic foods and supplies to pay off the loans. I should mention one other thing, that the presidents of these countries knew that if they accepted the loans, they were putting their countries deep into debt, but they were going to get wealthy off this. Their families were going to benefit because they owned the businesses, they owned the industries, they owned the things that were helped by electricity and so forth. But there was another incentive for them, and that was that what we call jackals were in the background. And these are CIA assets usually, who overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders.
John Perkins is not the only one that spoke about this. Many others say that developing countries which are in heavy debt may go through coups and assassinations as a result of not wanting to play by these rules.
For those of you who are wondering, because you asked me, like, so what happens, when you don't pay?
And they say that these institutions and companies that lend countries have thousands of employees, and some jobs there are to manufacture and manage such crises. I reached Vincent Bevins, author of The Jakarta Method, a book which discusses the American intervention and collusion during the mass killings of Indonesians by their government in the 60s. I am sure he has something to say about this.
Hi, Vincent. Are there figures like economic hitmen, really? Ones that force abusive contracts on nations and countries?
What I can say is that in the second half of the 20th centuries, it was absolutely true that a lot of countries in the global south, countries that used to be part of something called the Third World Movement, ended up saddled with a lot of debt, which became unsustainable. And the fact that they were saddled with debt and the fact that the debt became unsustainable has a lot to do with institutions and actors based in the global north.
So are these institutions and actors from the north economic hitmen? Who is benefiting from this?
There were a lot of people that did benefit from these crises, whether or not they were financial actors or key players in international banks. I think what's important is that it absolutely happened and it benefited a small group of rich people in the global north.
And do you think that these practices are still in place today?
It's now fairly well recognized that the prescriptions the IMF was going around the world and handing out to indebted and poor countries were often very destructive. The IMF has even gone back on a lot of what it said in the past was the right medicine for a country that, quote unquote, had problems, even if those problems might have been generated by the system itself. But at the time, nobody was questioning this. And the fact that the IMF 20, 30 years later says, oops, we actually might have ruined half the world's countries doesn't change the fact that we're still on the path today that was created by those actions generations ago.
From an economic perspective, and even capitalistic one, wouldn't you say that keeping everybody healthy with good purchase power to engage in the global economy is better for the whole world than crippling them by loans that they cannot repay?
This is the paradox at I think, the heart of liberal ideology, right? Because one would believe, based on the tenets of economics practiced in the English-speaking world, and one would believe, based on the ideals of liberalism in general, that it would be better for everyone to make sure the countries in the global south are growing just as fast and as robustly as any other country. But what we have seen is that did not happen over the last 70 years, and countries in the global north are still doing just fine.
In the middle of so much data, someone could say,
that's why they fucking constantly push the narrative that, like, global extreme poverty at the global scale has been eviscerated as a consequence of global capitalism, when in fact it's the one nation that was able to escape those treacherous conditions, that nation being China, that almost single-handedly wiped out extreme poverty. Now, obviously, global poverty is still a very different metric than the way you understand poverty here in the imperial core in the United States of America, obviously. Those numbers are still very fucking horrifying. It's just that it was much, much more horrifying before, I guess.
Well, these countries and regimes accepted the deal and committed willingly. Nobody forced them. I will ask this question to the American economist, Richard D. Wolff.
Hi, Professor Wolff. How are you?
Very good. I'm very glad to be here.
What can you tell me about the so-called economic hitmen and corporations?
Yeah, and for the record, and this is not my assessment, this is the assessment of, like, the American State Department at this point, and they have no interest in being favorable or being honest or nice about China. But as far as what China does in the One Belt, One Road initiative and the loans that they offer African countries, for example, or even places like Indonesia, as a matter of fact, the loan conditions are infinitely more favorable in comparison to the IMF, and the additional control that they get seemingly is nowhere near as bad as Western forces in general. This is the reason why Western leaders have talked about, possibly offering better, more favorable loans in the future, and maybe not even implementing austerity measures at all. China has also forgiven a lot of the loans that they've given to African nations too. So there's that. I'm not going to sit here and say, like, it's infinitely better. It's totally better. I promise you it's better. We don't know. We don't know what might happen in the future, but thus far, it is better.
Or institutions that strangle countries' economies?
First of all, it happens all the time. It is nothing new. It is not rare, it is common.
So somebody from a powerful corporation goes and
Will sometimes connect to a local equivalent of himself and cut a deal and say, look, I'm going to get paid $10 million for getting this done. I will give you $2 million if you become my local eyes and ears to help me work this out.
forgive me if I will sound naive, isn't the country receiving this loan participating willingly in this terrible deal?
Happens all the time. People from third world countries can get into that because they understand this game and they get the job because they say, I know better about the details of local politics. And by the way, it often fails. Don't imagine it's all so smooth. Sometimes one of these people will get drunk and say the wrong thing to the wrong person. Sometimes a local official will have a change of heart and want out of this situation. Sometimes people who take a portion then get blackmailed by somebody else who knows they did that, and now they have to get out of that. International credit is a very complicated, sneaky, personal business that can have all the different twists and turns that you can imagine.
Sometimes we have whistleblowers, people who speak up out of principle. This could change things, actually, right?
The only answer I can give you is that everything has been done imaginable to keep this game going. And one of the most important things is that when you get caught, either nothing is done or one or two individuals are punished, but you never change the basic system. And let me be for a moment the advocate of the banker who initiates this. That banker knows that if he can work 3 or 4 big deals, one in Ecuador, one in Mali, and one in Malaysia.
Look, from your perspective, if you're staring at the barrel of a goddamn gun, like at the top of the hour, you're going to do whatever you can to avoid the ad break. And sometimes that requires you taking on loans. That is simply how it works. Here's the 3-minute ad break now.
He will be promoted to the president of the bank. That's how you succeed in the bank. They don't care how you do it. You shouldn't embarrass the bank, of course. But your job is to get that loan done. So if you don't, because you are honest or you have scruples, you are shooting yourself in the foot. You are destroying
Hasan caught laughing at poor people. Yep.
your own career. So often you will, if you know these people, they will tell you they have no choice. And that it's important for people to understand. This is a systemic problem.
Broke boys. Oh, God. This is such a funny, incredibly like movie magic ass. Tolomnias and Kanishi, thank you for the 10 and 5 gifted subs. His faith in numbers has been shaken. I mean, he is literally a theater kid. He is literally a theater kid. He is a fucking actor, chat. It doesn't get more theater kid than that.